It's not just about, it's not about race, it's not about skin color, it's not about gender. It's beyond that. It's about diversity of mindset. So having people from lots of different walks of life is going to help you be creative and overcome better challenges. So I think if companies were thinking about like how do you start building that culture, you have to kind of commit to that.
Welcome to Culture Crunch, brought to you by Hunters and Unicorns. We're here to talk company culture and discuss what companies can do to drive best practice. Today, we're joined by Dalton Van Hatcher, Chief Revenue Officer of Felux and co-founder of Us in Technology. Dalton, welcome to Culture Crunch.
Thanks for having me, Karen. I'm really excited to be here.
Dalton, are you able to please just expand a little bit more about what you're doing currently and your experience?
Right now, I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Felux, which we're building the world's first steel SaaS-enabled business-to-business marketplace. We're making steel sexy is what we call it. But what that means is really bringing kind of the DoorDash, Uber, Lyft experience to the steel industry. It's an antiquated industry in terms of technology, primarily offline. And so what we're doing is helping our customers really accelerate the growth of their business through using technology. And so it's been an interesting journey. But just briefly about myself, I was fortunate enough and blessed to work under the leadership of early in my career of John McMahon, who's been featured on on Hunters and Unicorns. In the 33 CXOs, and I started as an SDR at Blade Logic actually under John's leadership and David Acharya, who's now the CEO of MongoDB, but spent some time working in various different roles at different startups. So I was an early employee at Sumo Logic, which IPO'd a couple years ago, and I was at multiple kind of enterprise software solutions like BMC Software and Fuse, and most recently was at a company called Vapor.io, and we were basically re-architecting the internet by building micro-modular data centers for low latency use cases, which is kind of a mouthful, but really looking at how is the internet architected today and how is it going to be in the future. But what I'm most proud of now is I actually have my own company too called Us in Technology. We're going to talk a little bit about it today, but Us in Technology is it's a DEI platform, so we're helping underrepresented folks get into the tech industry, which is a big challenge today. A lot of companies are great at recruiting, but not so much at recruiting underrepresented talent. But I also do a lot of philanthropy work. I'm on the board at Jernigan Foundation. I help out at a company called Freedom Seal Global, which is eradicating human trafficking in supply chains. And I also advise several tech startups like Aerial Ops and Hark, which is really a kind of a customer experience, helping brands with their customers.
Wow, an incredibly decorated sort of experience there already, Dalton. And I think a really interesting starting point would be to discuss it, in your opinion, what good company culture is.
100%. Yeah, when I think of good company culture, I actually had a big life event recently. I had my first baby girl, so I just had a daughter. She's about 3.5 months old. Her name's Freya. She's a wonderful blessing to my wife and I. And when I think about a good company culture, it's really like my ability to take paternity leave and really have people embrace and help me through that journey, and really being able to dial it back and focus on my family and the things that I need to focus on. That was kind of a wow moment for me when I was able, as the CRO of an early stage startup, we just had raised our seed round and we were in the process of raising our Series A. Having the other executives and the other team members really step up and not miss a beat, that was like a huge eye-opening experience. So when I think of what does that mean from a culture perspective? It's really embracing family, embracing work-life balance, but also like embracing people. Like one of the things that I think about when building a culture is, you know, are you hiring Dalton Van Hatcher or are you hiring a chief revenue officer? And companies that get it hire Dalton Van Hatcher, not a chief revenue officer. And so having an inclusive culture is the start of that. And I think for a lot of companies, if they focused and had an inclusive culture, they would look a lot more diverse. But that's one of the challenges that I'm sure we're going to talk about a little bit today.
Absolutely. And in terms of one of the pillars, if you will, of good culture, what do you think that would be? What could companies do to really drive good company culture in a tangible and measurable way?
Yeah, I think that really it starts with diversity of mindset. So having people from different walks of life and different experiences is really a big part of that. And so diversity is not just about, it's not about race, it's not about skin color, it's not about gender. It's beyond that. It's about diversity of mindset. So having people from lots of different walks of life is going to help you be creative and overcome better challenges. So I think if companies were thinking about like how do you start building that culture, you have to kind of commit to that. It's not easy. It's a journey. It's a transformation. The tech industry is not a very diverse place, but I would tell you that that significantly can pay off because overcoming challenges is mission critical to early stage startups. So if you can tackle it in different angles from different viewpoints, you're always going to be better equipped to tackle those problems as they come up.
Fantastic. And what do you think companies can do to nurture new talent?
Yeah, so I think that everybody has to start somewhere, and I think that one of the challenges is we always have this kind of funny saying is like make the SDR role entry level again. And so in today's world, there's such a big expectation around experience, and I think that what companies have to realize and people have to understand is that whenever most people who are in hiring positions probably have like a lengthier experience under their belt. Typically the world they entered is different than the world it is today, and so people have to kind of understand and remove their bias, or try to, as much as they can, embrace experiences that are going to help the company. And so I think meeting people where they are is really what that comes down to. And so the people coming into the workforce today grew up in a very different world than I grew up in, and so making sure that you embrace and account for that when hiring is extremely important.
Fantastic. And so talking about the new workforce, if you will, joining now, what can we do as more senior leaders within businesses? What can we do to really nurture their career progression?
So I think people talk a lot about like mentorship, but mentorship doesn't cut it, as I would say. You
Okay.
really have to advocate for people, and there's this concept of really like mentorship versus advocacy. And mentorship is really about helping people by telling them hey, I would handle it a different way, or answering questions after the fact. Advocacy is really taking like a front seat and really helping people with leveraging your influence to help people. And so that's what I would tell to companies and leaders out there is really think about helping your people understand the why. I was fortunate enough to have just amazing mentors. The 33 CXOs, for example, I worked with all of those people, and a lot of them took the time to help me understand the why. And that's where, a big part of why and where I am today. And so I think as leaders, one of the things that's really important, and especially in today's world where there's a lot of disconnect from communication standpoint because of just the availability of information, you really have to help people understand the why. It's an information overload in this world. People are really obsessed with outcomes, But understanding how we got to there, or the inputs, that's what's really going to impact someone's future in their career. So as a leader, helping people understand the why behind things, you're going to have a big impact on that person's career.
Okay, so just assimilating and understanding fully what we've just touched upon, you're saying that if organizations propelled and invested in having sponsors, not just mentors, that would do a huge amount in facilitating young careers and nurturing them. And then also, sorry, I've lost my place. You talked about mentoring, sponsorship, and also the why. Okay, let me just do that again. Sorry. So, Dalton, just understanding exactly what we've touched upon there, you're saying if companies actually had more sponsors as well as mentors, nurturing that sort of new talent, that would do a lot. But also with leaders actually taking the time to share the why, the purpose, in your opinion, that would do a lot to really drive the culture.
Yeah, I think that actually Cedric Pesh, who has been on your show before, he's a great mentor and just one of the best leaders in my opinion out there. CRO of MongoDB. Early in my career, he taught me, understanding the journey of the ocean, and what he meant by that is like, if you ask someone to hammer, a nail into a board, if you're trying to build a ship and the ship needs to journey through, treacherous seas, you better make sure that ship's not going to sink, right? Things are going to come up, storms are going to come up. So what's really important is if you treat people like, hey, they're just hammering a nail into a board, versus teaching them the journey of the ocean and the journey of the adventure, like, why are we doing this? What's the importance behind this? That's we call at us in tech having dream chasers. Like, teach them the dreams and the art of the possible so that they can excel and have impact on their career from that standpoint. And so leaders a lot of times forget that, and they push asks and tasks, as I would call it, to their teams without teaching them the why. The why is extremely important, especially for people, is if they want to progress their career and become leaders or have their own businesses. They need to understand why these tasks are important and mission critical.
So we're not just asking our colleagues to join us on the journey. We're actually telling them more about actually why we're on this journey, what the destination means to them. Getting them connected to our purpose is essential in looking after our talent, retaining staff, scaling, growing, etc.
Exactly, and that's a hard part with businesses. As they scale, it becomes harder and harder. And so as you're building like your culture, it's easy when you have 20 or 30 employees. Really, after that 40 employee mark is when it starts getting very difficult. But it really comes down to your leadership. So having really talented leaders, but having the leaders, giving them the flexibility and the breathing room to enable their teams to understand the why and take the time to do that, that's going to help you scale that culture, to the next, couple hundred or thousand employees. It becomes very difficult because you're playing a game of phone tag, as we call it, or telephone, where what someone says is going to get jarbled and maybe misconstrued to someone else. But
Yeah.
if you have really good leadership, and you don't and you give your leaders an adequate amount of people they're responsible for, and you give them the power to understand their people, then that's where your culture can scale, and everyone can feel connected to the journey, which is becoming increasingly harder and harder with how much data and information is out there.
Right. Okay. So, Dalton, we've talked a lot about how more junior talent can be nurtured and career progression can really be facilitated by businesses. But let's talk about DEI, diversity, equality and inclusion, because obviously we know this is a huge factor in good company culture. Propelling, DEI is absolutely crucial. It's integral. So what can companies, I suppose, let's start, let me put it another way. What do you think is a challenge that companies are facing in terms of really driving DEI at the moment?
Yeah, so today the tech industry, for example, us in technology, a company that Kendrick Trotter and I co-founded, one of the big kind of challenges in the world today is, we call underrepresented or marginalized folks. The definition of that to us is Black, Indigenous, people of color, women, any underrepresented minorities, veterans, people of the LGBTQIA plus community, and also anyone who grew up in a single parent household or a first gen college grad. And that's not, we're not defining anything by race. It's really about experience and like where they came from or how they grew up or the different experiences they had growing up. What's really important is in the tech industry, it's about 1.3% Black in the U.S. And to give you a perspective around that, the U.S. population is about 14% African American or Black, that identify as African American or Black. So there's a big gap there. And from the Latino population or Latinx population, it's about 3.3%, in the U.S. In tech, when the population's about 18.5%. So there's a massive gap there. And so one of the challenges with that is traditionally it's come from, there's a lot of societal challenges that have come with that. There's a lot of challenges around access, and so and also geography. So a lot of the HBCU schools or the Latino populations are removed from the big tech hubs, and so what people have to understand is there's been technology, especially this tech sector, has not been around for a very long time. It's not like steel. I'm working in the steel industry and bringing tech to steel. Steel's been around much longer than the technology sector, and so what's difficult sometimes for companies to embrace or understand is that there's this lack of access. So getting more STEM programs, so into schools and helping people in those communities learn about technology at a young age, that's really important. Another thing, another challenge is it's with the schools and where the tech hubs are, the tech industry has become homogenous in terms of a lot of people that look like me, right? I'm a Caucasian male. I grew up in a mixed race family. My grandpa's African American, my uncle's African American on both sides of my family, but I'm a Caucasian male when people see me. And one of the challenges that companies don't, in my opinion, fully understand yet is there's this generational challenge of lack of access to technology. And so what companies can do is they can start investing in programs to help, to outreach and help people, understand that this is a great career path. This is something that's very fulfilling, and that you can, build generational wealth for your families. A lot of the people in us in tech that get their first job, for example, when we help them, they make more money in that first base salary than they had growing up in their household combined, which is, a significant impact on the trajectory of their family and their future generations to come.
Yeah. So in terms of what can be done, I mean, we're talking about permeating so many different areas in society, from education to awareness and so forth. And right now, if we were to look at the tech industry, what do you think a change could be made, let's say from tomorrow, that would give more access to individuals that you touched upon it, who are kind of underrepresented within the tech space? What can be done to help them, to give them access to within the tech domain?
Yeah, I think that going into those communities or having some sort of outreach program that provides resources to an understanding of what a career in tech would look like is something that people can do, whether it's through universities or it's just through different your local communities. I think that companies can invest resources. A lot of times they have people that are out there advocating or trying to make this change. But in order to make true change, you have to invest resources, not just money, but also time. And so I think a lot of the big companies that get it right, that are that are chipping away at their diversity numbers, and you have to remember diverse teams outperform homogenous teams by 30%. So this is a business problem. It's not just a societal problem. It's a business problem as well. And so the companies that are getting it right are really working on community outreach, whether it's partnering through programs like Us in Technology, or Sisters in Sales, or Girls Who Sell, or Correlation One's another one. There's all these different companies that are really kind of out there teaching people that one, you don't have to be an engineer to be in tech. That's a big misconception too. Myself, a former college athlete, and in a marketing major, I had not coded ever in my life, but I've had a successful career by just having coachability, drive, integrity, intelligence. Those are really the four key things you need to be successful in tech, which are soft skills, not hard skills. But I think that companies can go into their communities and really start investing. It won't have a big impact today, but it will have a big impact tomorrow and for the future. And that's how we're going to actually make this change.
Thank you, Dalton. That's incredibly insightful. We're talking a lot about what companies can do outward facing, right? External incentives and projects that they can embark on. But what do you think companies can do within themselves to really drive DEI?
Yeah, so one of the big drivers is really is think about your hiring practices. So
Okay.
when you think about who you're hiring and the opportunities you're giving those to, a lot of companies, and there's nothing wrong with this, to be clear, but a lot of companies rely heavily on referrals. And so if your team is all from one university or one fraternity or sorority, that's what your team's going to look like. That's just their network. And so what's really important is companies invest in and help your hiring teams and managers open that candidacy pool. There's a lot of programs out there like Us in Technology that will help you with this, but just helping them and giving them the ability and power to kind of broaden that is important. Another piece is when you talk about hiring teams, there's a lot of bias that goes into hiring, and so that can be a challenge too. Is around it's easier to manage people that and understand. So teaching those teams or investing in programs to help those teams understand that they may have bias when they're hiring. That's important. But another big piece too is really just thinking about your talent pool and your hiring practices. A lot of times, companies you see, in 2022, you see a lot of companies investing in a chief diversity officer, or in DEI having a DEI team within their company. One of the challenges with that is talent acquisition, sales, or whoever the hiring teams are, the hiring managers, whether it's sales or engineering. And then also the DEI, they're typically not on the same page in terms of how they're organizing their hiring practices. And so what I would tell companies, a lot of people are looking at, when they hear DEI, they think about inclusion and bringing yourself to work. Part of that, if your company's already not diverse, which most tech companies are not diverse, it's really about bringing in diversity. And so it starts with looking at your incoming talent and where are you getting them from, and are you opening those candidacy pools, and does your talent acquisition team, is your DEI team and your hiring team all on the same page in terms of how they're hiring, or who they're hiring, or what pools are they hiring from.
Okay. And Dalton, whilst we're on the subject of hiring, and obviously the TA role is absolutely integral to how businesses scale and grow and driving the right culture. But what methods do you think an individual who sits in a TA role within the tech space, what can they do from today to really help address the inequalities faced by the underrepresented communities that we discussed?
Yeah, I think that having community outreach in terms of giving people insight to what a day in the life of tech at your company would look like. I think there's a lot of misconceptions from from the underrepresented standpoint, and also from the company standpoint. There's a big gap there, and I think that TA people can spend time in those communities or through partnerships like us in technology and others to really like give people insight into what it's like to work there. And we there's a concept of like ERG groups, and so ERG groups is a big is a big it's a big thing. It came out in the 1970s and it's kind of evolved over time, but it's becoming now that a lot of companies are focused on DEI and like changing this diversity challenge that we have.
Yeah.
Um, ERG groups are a great way. And so if you can go into communities and have an underrepresented person who's potentially looking at that company, talk to someone about their experience as an underrepresented person at your company, that's really impactful and powerful. So if you're a TA, if you're in TA, if you have an employee, enterprise resource or employee resource group internally, and you can connect them with those people, that's really important. But you have to be careful. You don't want to, quote unquote, tokenize someone by this, but offering those things. Hey, we have one of our partners, one of my good friends, Derek Hall, runs the Black ERG group at Service Titan. It's called Black Titans. And so if you have a potential candidate, you can mention that we have employee resource groups like these resource groups and see if they're interested and would you like to talk to any of them about their experience. And if you can offer things like that and someone can have a conversation with someone who's worked there, it's going to go a long way in acquiring that talent.
You talked earlier, Dalton, about the statistics. So when you started your career in tech 15 years ago, the numbers of underrepresented individuals was staggeringly low. 15 years on, those numbers really haven't changed. What do you think companies can do from a recruitment screening perspective to because as you said earlier, this is a business problem. I'm very passionate about the moralistic perspective, the integrity of it all. But if we were to go down to the basics, to the numbers, diverse groups perform better. And so how can companies, I guess, amend their recruitment and their screening to really drive DEI?
Yeah, so one of the challenges in my opinion, and especially in tech, is we don't teach our future leaders like how to recruit. It's something that is so important. The best companies in the world have the best people. It's that simple. But a lot of times we're not teaching our teams on like what's the process of recruiting and how do you recruit. And so what happens in today's world and just as a society, we're taught, especially in tech, to screen out versus screen in. And that's really a big challenge. And so what I would tell people out there is like, one, have your best recruiters and leaders like talk about it, like enable and train your teams on like what are the best practices on recruiting. Understand that there's bias. Every human has bias. You're naturally going to gravitate towards things that you can connect with, or you had a similar experience. That's really important that your teams understand that they have that implicit bias. So it's not that you're ever going to change that. It's holding it accountable and keeping it in check and understanding that. But screening in versus screening out is so it's so imperative when you're looking at diverse talent, because a lot of the perception or the challenges that maybe the first line manager or the second line manager see is only from their purview.
Okay.
And so what's really important is that it's not to go and tell people how to hire. It's to give them the tools to hire people that they that don't look like them or grew up in a different experience than them. You need to equip the people with that and give them the ability to screen in. So let's instead of, hey, you don't have these 5 or 6 skills, let's flip the script. It's, hey, you don't have these 5 or 6 skills, but you have these 4 superpowers that are going to make you successful. We're going to teach and train you to go do this. And one of the COVID and kind of what's happened in the world today has accelerated this. But the companies that get it, that have good enablement and good training and can make their teams more productive, they're surviving and thriving. The companies that don't have training or don't have enablement, that aren't putting the resources in, you know, it's not a good company to join anyway. And that's where the challenge lies, is a lot of people say, hey, you don't have this experience, so I'm not going to hire you. What I hear is, I don't know how to teach you this experience. And so that's really good for people to understand as they're looking at jobs too. A lot of people get frustrated or combative when they hear, hey, the person telling them they don't have this experience. That's not what I hear. What I hear is, I don't know how to teach you this. And so I would run from those companies personally.
I never thought of it like that. But you're absolutely right. You know, we as companies, we have responsibilities to develop our people, right? Just like we talk about the development of products. Our people are our greatest asset. And so again, we've talked about how culture is driven from education. It's also driven from an L&D, a learning and development perspective as well. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and what's really important about that is understanding your people. If you understand your people and where they want to grow to or how they learn, that's extremely imperative too. I have a person on my team who has a visual disability, and we actually hired this person from us in technology, and this person is one of my best sales reps. But she one of the challenges that I had to overcome is like really embracing, like, she has needs that I have to adhere to help her succeed. And a lot of times it's really easy for us to quickly, like, just view the world the way we view it.
Yeah.
Meaning, like, you can't expect yourself out of others. And what that means is really, not everyone views the world the same way you do. And so what's important about that is, like, people learn differently. Maybe you have to send them, information beforehand to help people who are more visual learners. Maybe there's people that, it takes them longer to read. I've worked with some people that, were dyslexic, and, it wasn't something they necessarily shared. But when you take the time to, like, understand them and understand how they learn and give them that time, those are some of the best people I've ever worked with, and, are super successful. And so a lot of companies just, pool everyone into one, conform into one way of learning or one, career path. And everyone's unique, and that's what makes everyone great. And so people's journey, my journey is going to be different than your journey, and everyone's journey is going to be different. And so you have to embrace that. And that starts with, like, when we talk about inclusion, that's what it's about, is embracing people's journey and who they are and their superpowers, and screening in versus screening out.
So just whilst we're on the topic of the screening in versus screening out, and hiring people that perhaps look differently or have had very different experiences, what can we really do to drive more awareness around that? Because in my opinion, I think the tech space, in some ways it's very forward thinking, and then I think in other ways, especially from the recruitment perspective, we're a little bit behind. How can we raise awareness when hiring around the piece of some individuals just have better decisions, or, they're able to make good decisions, whereas other people actually had good decisions?
Yeah, I think that's a really important aspect of not just the hiring, but retaining talent as well. But spot on. A lot of times, it really comes down, like, my parents were both teachers, and my parents were, as educators, I didn't know much about the tech industry. And so that's pretty common for anyone, unless you have an uncle or a brother or a mother or whoever, a sister that was in the industry. It's very unknown. It's just, it's tech. It's this thing. People think of computers, they think of, like, phones, but, like, what is it? And so I think when raising awareness around that, it's really just having an understanding that people don't know what they don't know. So in my opinion, it's absolutely ridiculous to have an entry level, position, where, it's someone who's, maybe, in their, early 20s, and you're asking them, they haven't worked in tech, and you're asking them about their experience of, using a sales intelligence tool or a CRM. Like they don't know what a CRM is. I didn't know what a CRM was when I started my career. And so I think that, raising awareness around, let's meet people where they are and educate them and help them versus trying to hold these standards that are ridiculous. And with this with everything going on in today's world and people with remote work and quote unquote the great resignation, you're going to find a lot of people are just going to gravitate toward the companies that meet them where they are. And so that's really important, is understanding that a lot of these people don't have they don't have the experience or understanding of or access to people that do. And so that's really important. And when you're talking about having having great choices versus having access and great choices, that's really important to understand too. And a great example of this is my co-founder Kendrick was an Uber driver. He was a former D1 football player. Grew up in a single parent household. He's African American in Oakland. When he entered the tech industry, he didn't know about tech, and it's crazy to think because he lives in the Bay Area in San Francisco, which is the tech capital of the world, but he didn't really know anyone in tech. We talk about this all the time and kind of his journey and us in tech. He was an Uber driver after school. He thought he was going to play in the NFL, and in his community, it's the streets. It's he'll tell you to get rich. You have the streets. You have be an artist, a singer, or a musician, or a rapper, or you play sports, and those are the three ways. It's not, hey, I could be a doctor, a lawyer, or get into be a CRO at a tech company. And so really understanding, trying to understand, embrace, and empathize with where people are coming from is really important when you're hiring, because a lot of the questions and standards we hold people to are really single focus. It requires you to have access to people or an understanding of things. And so I think that's one piece. The second piece is in Kendrick's story, for example, he got a job as an SDR and in San Jose. He couldn't afford, San Jose is in the Bay Area. It's one of the most expensive places to live in the world. His leadership was telling him, hey, you have to be the first one in the office and the last one to leave if you want to make it. And you need to hit your dials and your calls and these things, right? That a lot of sales leaders say, we all say. But what that company didn't understand is he didn't have any money. He couldn't afford to live within 30 minutes of where the office was, but it was a requirement to come into the office every day. He actually lived in Sacramento and commuted almost 6 hours every single day, and he ended up, because he was working so hard, he ended up sleeping in his car. But those are the little things. It's not just that Kendrick had the drive and coachability and sought people's help, and he got the help he needed, and he finally succeeded, and now he's a CEO of his own company. But the point is those sleeping in your car just to be able to work in an office, those things, it's not about will Kendrick make it, it's about how much risk there is to fail. And that's the hard part about that is that sustainable over and over again every day? Probably not. The other person in that position they hired, that's parents, maybe were able to rent them an apartment right down the street where the person can go to the gym and have some food and not live paycheck to paycheck. Is that person does that mean automatically that person's gonna be more successful than Kendrick? No, but what it means is that the chances are higher, and that's what it's about.
Okay. That resonates hugely, and I think there is so much more to talk about when you look at why decisions are made, and I think as a society, not just within the tech space, but we are quite quick to say, well, that person's successful because they work hard, and it's not always that easy to determine. There are so many other factors, so many tangibles which need to be addressed, and I do think that we're starting to have those relevant conversations, but we need to do more. We need to have more conversations at higher levels, and make it, I think, part of the fabric, that narrative needs to be really part of the fabric. I mean, the conversation, Dalton, with you, as always, has been incredibly insightful. And there's been some really, really interesting takeaways from the importance of sponsorship as well as mentoring within businesses in the tech space. And of course, the kind of the role that the TA plays and how closely integrated it needs to be with the other leaders within the business in terms of driving and making hires that reflect smart decisions and propelling DEI. And of course, the importance of screening in versus screening out. I think that's, I've heard about it being, I've heard about it, but just talking to you just in more granular detail, I think has been just so informative.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kieran. I would just say that, for companies that are really, out there thinking about their culture, one kind of last thought I'd leave people with is like, Kendrick and I talk about this a lot, and it's a big topic in, us in technology is, if you ask those mentees which companies they want to work for, they'll all tell you. They'll go to the website and they look to see how many underrepresented people are in their marketing, like on their website. How many of them, they go check LinkedIn and see like how many people work there, how many of them are in management positions. Those are things that are really prevalent. And so for a lot of, it doesn't just start with your hiring, it's also the way that you market and you write job descriptions and that you portray your brand out there in the market. And so as companies are looking to kind of build a more inclusive culture, it's not just inclusive hiring, it's also inclusive marketing as well, which is a big part. And maybe on episode 2 we can cover some of that.
That's I'll hold you to that, Dalton. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Again, your summary was really, really thought-provoking. And Dalton, I until we talk again, thank you so much.